Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rushing the Field, national college football show from NBC Sports. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach, and you can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also see us on the NBC Sports YouTube page. And we said that we were going to take a Super Bowl week off, and we decided not to because there was some interesting news out of Columbus. Ohio State announces a contract extension for Ryan Day, keeps him in Columbus through the 2031 season. And he's going to be making $12.5 million per season. And there's bonuses on top of that. So he's going to be among the highest paid coaches in the country. We know Kirby Smart makes about 14. So he's behind him. There's a couple private schools. You never really know. So, but I think we can safely say top 3 coach in the country. He is in the mix with Dabo Swinney, Kirby Smart, the only other coaches who've won national championships and are active head coaches as well. So big news for Ohio State, who just is a couple weeks off a national championship. We'll get into some of the staff turnover and other various offseason topics in Columbus. But after everything that Ryan Day went through with this fan base, we were critical of him. A lot of people were critical of him after losing to Michigan for the 4th straight time. He is sticking around. He is actively deciding to, and the school obviously wants him to, and they're committing as much resources as anybody else in the country behind him. So Joshua, reaction to the news that Ryan Day's sticking around and he's going to be paid a pretty penny after that national championship.
I mean, it's well earned, right? Like it puts him in line, as you mentioned, with the other guys who have championships that are coaching the game right now. So I totally understand it. And I always felt like there was this thought, especially the way everything happened after they lost to Michigan this year, that, some people thought it was like Ryan Day is going to win this championship and then, start building his case to go to the NFL, whether that happens this offseason for some opportunity, if he stepped there as a coordinator, or, a year or 2 from now, if he had the opportunity as a head coach, like that's what he's going to do because things were crazy for him. And I think there's this like reconciliation of Ryan Day saying, no, this is a place where I want to be. And I think part of that too is this legacy that we'll talk about, where Big Ten championship drought for the last 4 years, drought against Michigan for the last 4 years. But also, if he wins another championship, he'll be able to have something over Urban Meyer and over Jim Tressel, who are the guys who could only beat Michigan with their title. He would have 2. So I think there's that. But then there's the flip side of it again, where the university is like, championship is the thing. It's the most important thing. Become a national champ and we will reward you. So congratulations to Ryan Day, certainly after everything he went through to get to that point was huge. And he deserves to be paid like one of the guys who has the I'm a national championship coach title on their resume.
Yeah, he does. He does. And that's what this is, right? Because he was already paid well. Ohio State already was very in on, okay, what do we need to pay our players to compete at the highest level, to retain our top talent? Like the resources and the commitment was already there. We've talked a lot about that with Penn State, right? And like what they're doing this offseason to get to the levels that the Ohio States are already at. And this just bumps him up to that national championship level coaching salary. It is interesting in this climate. I've just kind of back of my mind been tracking, are there going to be any changes in the way that we do coach compensation now that players are going to get paid directly from schools? So far, no. We have a $3 million coordinator at Penn State. And, Ryan Day gets up to 12.5 with bonuses as well off a national championship run. But listen, I think the bigger thing is Ryan Day recommitting and wanting to stay, right? And I think obviously there were indications of all of that, like the way that he talked after the championship, the media tour he's been going around doing, the Tonight Show, all these things that, you just see a different version of him and a lighter version of Ryan Day after winning that and kind of alleviating the pressure of not winning a national championship on top of not beating Michigan for 4 years. That stuff is gone. And so you see a difference there. And then obviously, all the top players coming back, but you had an exodus of coaches, you had other things happening. But that bigger question, Joshua, that we had said, if you're saying losing to Michigan is the worst thing you've ever gone through, and after it's all done, you and your wife have talked about the death threats, have talked about the security around the clock that was necessary, the fans that posted your home address, all of these pieces that were really awful and were really uncomfortable. And yes, there was joy. And I saw it with him and his family on that field celebrating. but you are still sticking around in that environment. And like you said, Joshua, obviously, like there's been mea culpas from the people who were wrong about him or didn't think that
Sure.
he could coach a team to this. Beating teams like Tennessee, like Oregon, the way that they did on the way to a national championship, I think obviously really helps, right? Of like, this is someone who couldn't win the big game, and then you won a series of big games after big game after big game, and two SEC opponents en route to winning that national championship. But you still are in a pressure cooker. And
Yeah.
so he is still opting into staying in that pressure cooker.
I mean, pressure cooker is great too with $12.5 million a year, right? Like, I don't think that if you don't have anything else actively brewing, you're never turning that down. So certainly that's a part of it. But I'll say this: I never felt what it feels like to lose to Michigan as a player, but I've felt some pretty bad moments when I was at Ohio State. Losing Big Ten championship that would have punched a ticket to go to a national title was a bad one. Lost my final game I played in the horseshoe, and had we won that, we probably would have been in the playoff in 2015. Like I felt what it feels like to get close and then to slip in a big moment. But I also do have that feeling of being a champion, and in particular, being a champion at Ohio State with everything that Columbus has to offer in that fan base that is absolutely nuts, is the greatest fan base to ever celebrate with. And so I think once you get through all of that and the consternation and like all of the negative feelings, and I'm sure in the back of his mind, he was like, you know what, I might get petty if I win this championship, but then you feel the support. No, for real, or go on a revenge tour, but you feel the way that the community gets behind you after it happens. And it's really hard to avoid wanting to be in a place like that. It's special because of how the standards are and how the people are. But ultimately, when you win, you feel every great part of it.
You do. So again, this is someone we've talked about his overall record. It's 70-10 as the head coach at Ohio State. They've won at least 11 games in every season in his 6 years, except for the COVID shortened year, which they were 7-1, played in the national championship game. So this has been obviously a very successful tenure, except for the Michigan question. So before we move on, I do want to talk about that, because you've said that you've already felt it, like a decrease in the significance of that game and that rivalry, because it's one thing to say, yeah, you could win a national championship after losing this game, but then to actually do it, to, sign this kind of contract, the way that Columbus has reacted to winning a title, of course, everyone's happy. Does it lessen that rivalry? If you can do all of this and have all of this joy and sign up for more, if you can still lose to Michigan and do all of those other things.
Yeah, I mean, it feels weird, right? And it's not necessarily about this contract or whatever the case is. Like, this is, I think, one of the outcomes that we get, and I talk about this all the time with the expanded playoff, is you gave an opportunity to a team that in most other years wouldn't have been there, finished fourth in their conference, right? Like, in a lot of ways was like a team that we have never thought of as a championship team. You gave them an opportunity to play up to their talent level and to get hot in the postseason. They ended up winning it. And so I think, to answer the question, yeah, it kind of feels like if this happens again, I think people are, instead of the emotions and jumping to conclusions, kind of be like, wait and see, because it happened the last time. And that's a weird spot to be in. I also do know that if it happens more than just like one or two more times, people are going to get back to being weird again. And like, that's another one of these parts about this contract is I still think that there's like a nerve that's still kind of exposed with this fan base. And who knows when you get to next November, how people are feeling about things. Very strange. All of that to say, 12-team playoff killed my favorite rivalry in a lot of ways.
I don't think it's killed completely yet. We also still haven't even had like a Big Ten championship game rematch of Michigan, Ohio State, which people also say is super weird and devalues that rivalry as well. So we'll keep on that, because I do think the pressure and all of the energy, there will be a lot on Ryan Day to beat Michigan this year. Like that will happen.
Again, like the deal's done. So the pressure is going to be there. Like what's the buyout
but it's
saying, right? Like it is what it is at this point. The man's a champ. And he has the cachet now to.
You can put your head down and sleep just fine.
Yes. And I mean, you have the cachet to say, listen, just trust me once we get into the postseason. If it happens again, that's all you got to say.
Right. And then it's just a Michigan thing. It's like a Michigan mental block. And then everything else, because now you've proven you can win big games. So you don't have to group all of that together. Going to be really interesting. I actually can't wait. I wish we could fast forward a little bit until we get to November to see exactly how this is going to play out. Let's talk about the staff turnover for Ohio State as well, because last time we talked was before a little bit of movement. So still looking for a defensive coordinator as we sit here on Thursday, February 6th. But we can talk about some movement and some hires on the offensive side. So Chip Kelly leaves for the Los Angeles Raiders. He's back to the NFL. Offensive line coach Justin Fry, he leaves to the NFL as well to be the offensive line coach of the Arizona Cardinals. Meanwhile, Ryan promotes Brian Hartline. He is behind that string of incredible receivers that Ohio State has had, and then a bunch of them are on the NFL. Brian Hartline to OC, and then he brings in Virginia Tech offensive coordinator Tyler Bowen to be the offensive line coach. So there has been some departures and some hires and some movement internally, and we're getting a better sense of what the staff is going to look like towards next year. We still don't know, again, a little bit on the defensive side. Brian Hartline makes a ton of sense. It's a reward for all he's accomplished, and Jeremiah Smith in particular. He's had that co-OC label before, right? It got taken away when Chip Kelly came in. Is that how that one worked?
No, I think they kept the label.
Oh, he still had it?
It was Chip's offense. Yeah.
Okay, right. So now he's the guy.
Yes.
So what does that mean? What do you make of some of the movements, some of the departures?
It's an interesting thing. I mean, you had two guys leave for the NFL, which I think were really good opportunities for both of those guys. And they were the two guys on the staff that probably had the most history with Ryan Day, which I thought was intriguing as well. But Justin Fry was never a great recruiter, was a phenomenal developer. He gets an opportunity there with the Cardinals. So best of luck to him. Chip Kelly, $6 million a year is what's being reported to call the offense.
Yeah.
There in Vegas. So again, congratulations, great job. And Ryan Day had a conversation with Joel Klatt in his podcast, and it sounded like, this was something that didn't come out of left field. It was the way Ryan talked about it was like Chip was always going to be short term. So now you get to Bowen for the offensive line hire. I think this is a phenomenal one. He's known as a great recruiter. He's a guy who has played college football. People rave about him, but he also has coordinator experience in his background. And I think that's big for Brian Hartline, who is a guy who's been a very fast riser in this industry. He's known for recruiting. They did the co-OC thing. I don't think it went as well as they had hoped. He wasn't as ready a couple years ago when they tried it. And again, meshing Brian Hartline, a guy who's used to the throw game, with an offensive line coach who has coordinator experience, I think that's really good, especially since Chip Kelly is out of the way there. So I'm here for it. I love the offensive line hire for them. I think the OC hire is well deserved for Brian Hartline. I'm just curious to see how it goes since he doesn't really have play calling experience, but it also stabilizes a lot of things for them. There's chatter every year about will Brian Hartline be back? Will Brian Hartline be back? And they've paid him and they tried to elevate him. And now this is his shot to say that, it's his offense. And I think he deserves that opportunity.
Agreed. And, we saw this with Michigan, which had to make moves late in the cycle last year after their national championship. Your options are limited in general. It's not the same as if these positions had opened up in December. But these are really, I think they are very logical and should be good hires. There is going to be a lot of roster turnover. So it's not the worst time in the world to promote from within, to stabilize things, and to ensure, right, that Jeremiah Smith and some of these, star players stick around, right? And so you do have that. The core of Ohio State heading into next season will be back, right? Caleb Downs is back. Jeremiah Smith is back. Questions about who's going to be quarterback, although I think, I've already seen Julian saying on Heisman odds list for next year. I mean, everyone expects it's going to be him, right?
Right.
But you have a bunch of key players, although you lose all those veteran guys who came back for one more run at a national championship, and the leadership of those guys, right? The nation saw it out of Jack Sawyer and Emeka Ibuka and some of these guys that were really, really critical last year's team. So you are going to be starting anew, but the expectations remain really, really high. I was checking some odds from our pals over at BetMGM before we hopped on. Ohio State's the favorite to win it all, plus 450. as we sit here in early February, even without a defensive coordinator. And Jeremiah Smith is tied for the 4th best odds to win the Heisman Trophy. So expectations are going to be very high regardless of the turnover.
I mean, that's, it feels like that's the way it's been regardless. Like, even if it's not number one in national title odds, I think Ohio State probably over the last handful of years has probably been, top 3, 4, or 5. Anyway, even with questions, there are a lot of questions, though. I think you and I already talked about this, but it's certainly not where I would have their odds right now. As I mentioned, Brian Hartline, we love him as a wide receiver coach, love him as a recruiter, unproven as an OC. Some turnover on that offensive line, quarterback positions turning over, you got turnover at running back, and a lot of the defense, pretty much the whole starting D line. And, your linebacker room is turned over a ton. And one safety who's coming back, who's one of the best players in America. The other one was knocking dudes out the whole playoff run, and he's going off to the NFL. Talented team, no doubt, question marks all around.
Yeah, but that's par for the course with these types of teams. It's why Georgia's always right up there, no matter who's at quarterback, no matter which defensive guys get drafted. We're kind of in that category. Same with Ohio State as well. But they do know the head man isn't going anywhere, and he's going to be sticking around through the 2031 season, as announced on Thursday by Ohio State. He's going to make $12.5 million a year, up in that category with the only 2 other active head coaches with a national championship. Going to be a fascinating offseason in Columbus. Can't wait to continue to dive into all of it here on Rushing the Field. We'll be back with more of our college football offseason continues. But for Joshua Perry, I'm Nicole Auerbach. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon.